Please join me in welcoming the co-director of Memory Box, Bjørn Johnson, and three of the subjects from the film, Captain A.J. Devine, Daisy Kahn, and Mary Adams. Welcome, Daisy. Do we have the others back there? Do we have the others?
Yes.
Okay. They can come out anytime. Bjørn Johnson, co-director of the film. Maybe they didn't hear me. Captain A.J. Devine and Mary Adams. They've just been in a movie. They can't be shy. Okay. There we go. There's Bjørn. Do we have Mary and AJ? Great. Welcome. All right. I guess we'll have AJ join us in a moment.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. Well, I do want to begin by congratulating you, Bjørn, on the film, and Mary and Daisy, just the courage that it must have taken to relive those memories as well. Congratulations on taking part in the film. Bjørn, I want to begin by asking you just about recapturing that moment. There are many ways that we can do it, and you had access to all of this remarkable, very gripping news footage, but you also had the personal stories of people. I'm trying to understand how you went about deciding what that balance would be between those very personal stories and the big news story.
No, it's a good question, and it was something we constantly grappled with in the edit, and as well as directing this film, I also edited it. So
Captain Devine, here he is.
Here we go, AJ. Should we get AJ on mic?
I think we'll share one of the mics.
So yeah, it was something we were always grappling with in the edit, but Ruth, the original artist, when she allowed us, she was very obviously protective of her incredible archive, but it was the words of the contributors were so powerful that I guess my approach was, let's not use archive to sensationalize. Let's use it to contextualize, because the words that they were all saying in the booth were so powerful that you didn't need to sensationalize, you didn't need to dramatize it. It was all there in their words. So it was a balance, and I think we did a good job where we just we stepped back as filmmakers, and we just let the words of our wonderful contributors speak for themselves, really.
I want to hear from the contributors, and I want to begin by asking you, where do you keep your memories of 9/11? Are they with you every day, or can you put them away someplace? Do they just come back up at certain moments? But in your minds, where are your memories of 9/11? Mary, do you want to start?
I think they're always with me, in a good way. And I think that there are times that they're brought out more powerfully, moments in life. And even making this film gave that opportunity that felt really good.
AJ?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I deal with it on a daily basis because life changed after that, and I'm still an airline pilot to this day, and so everything that we do, everything changed so dramatically as far as security goes, and even just the I don't know, the sheer enjoyment of the job necessarily changed, but so everything that we do kind of reflects basically on changes that was made based on what happened as a tragedy. So it's always in sort of the forefront, but as far as the tragedy of it goes and the hardship that it kind of created on that day, that I really realized that I really suppressed it and put it away after that cathartic in the box moment. I had completely forgot about doing that video, honestly, and I did not think consciously about 9/11 that much anymore, and I think it was kind of necessary for my mental health.
It was necessary to not think about it?
Correct.
I see. Okay. Daisy, what about for you?
For me, there are 3 calendars in the world. One is the Gregorian calendar, the other one's the Islamic calendar, and the other one is the 9/11 calendar, where really my life was changed and a certain kind of a mandate was thrust upon me, which I had to assume, which has continued into this day and the work that I do. So it's always in the shadows, in the background, in the foreground. And the work I do in Afghanistan is very relevant to what happened in 9/11. That's why we went there. So it's, for me, it's a continuation of the story, the ever-evolving story. And I'm hoping that we will make the right decisions going forward, reflect back on the 20 years, and think of a different way of engaging.
Daisy, you founded the Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality, and as you said, you have done work in Afghanistan, and Captain Devine, I know you've also spent some time there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the long shadow of 9/11 leading up to our present moment, and I'm sure into the future as well, and just how you think about how our world has changed as a result of it.
Well, so 9/11 had a disproportionate effect on the American Muslim community as well as the global community. So if we just look at it from the last 20 years, 3,000 people died, innocent people died in America. And that was a very tragic event. But immediately after that, Muslims were rounded up and there was special registration, and many were detained and many were deported. So families were split up. This is not something that most Americans are aware of, but it happened. Then hate crimes went up significantly. Islamophobia, grew by leaps and bounds because now there was hatred of Muslims. And although some of the contributors made such efforts to make sure that hate wouldn't reside in their town or in their own families, it was happening because people were seeing images in the news. Then we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, and then we continued on another experiment in Syria. And the estimates are that close to 1 million people have died in those wars, not to mention the displaced people. So if we just do pure math, for every American that died, close to 300 Muslims have died as a result of those wars. Those numbers are staggering, and we have to do things differently. So, and of course, we went to Afghanistan with 2 stated goals, 2 stated foreign policy goals. There were others, but 2 very important. One is to uplift the women and give them the status that they deserve, that is rightfully theirs in Islam, and also to disarm the Taliban. And in 2008, I held a congressional briefing. I brought 3 Afghan women here, and the room was full of 11 members of Congress, and only one of them was Republican. And the women pleaded with members of Congress, said, please, why aren't you disarming the Taliban? We don't see any efforts because they will resurface. And 20 years later, they are now in government, and women's rights are going to be taken back. And all the work that we have done and the billions and the trillions that we have spent there are going to get wasted. And this is the great tragedy.
I want to go to you if you've got any questions. We have some time for those. I've got a couple of others as well, but if you have any questions for Bjørn or any of the participants in the film, please just raise your hand and we can hear what you have to say. Yes, there's someone in the back. Yep.
recommend we share that without the sensationalism, without that, stirring up that hatred. How do we share that so that this isn't forgotten and the right lessons are taken away?
It's a great question. For those who weren't able to hear, it's how do you share the story of 9/11 with people who were too young to remember or perhaps weren't even born when it happened?
I mean, if I may, I think the way we remember 9/11 is through people like who are standing on the stage next to me. And it was always my approach with this film to, I said it a little bit in the intro, to tell the human story of 9/11. You know, we're 20 years down the road and we all know what happened that day, but it's the human cost and the ripple effect of 9/11. And what struck me working with Ruth's original archive was there was so many people that went in there. There was family members that lost someone and airline pilots and American Muslims, but there were just people on the street that bared witness to these things. And there's a real trauma in that. And I think the way you remember 9/11 is by, you know, cherishing these memories. This memory box is important because memory is emotion to me. And I would urge anyone here to, you know, we could only feature 30 or 40 people in this film, but Ruth's archive collected testimonies of nearly 600 people, and they're available to watch online, and it's 151 hours long, and I've watched it all, and it's an emotional, intense, very deep experience. So if people want to learn about 9/11, I would say start there. Go to the Voices of 9/11 project, and you'll get an incredibly varied perspective on what happened.
And the description, of course, of 9/11, to say if you were, you know, mentioning it to your children and describing the events, it's almost unimaginable. I mean, at the time when it was happened, we couldn't comprehend it. So, of course, that's necessary that none of us forget about it, especially those that came after. But at the same time, what I had found through my last 20 years and having gone to Afghanistan as a result and being immersed within, you know, a Muslim culture and just a culture of something that I had no concept of whatsoever, and then gaining a personal understanding how human all of this has been. So 9/11 was born out of misery that existed in some other person's lives, other person's culture, some people who did not comprehend what it meant to experience joy, because you can't conduct something like this and understand joy at the same time. And so I felt like, you know, that was born out of a certain misery that exists in this life, that exists for all of us in one way or another. So you already kind of have it in you what happened on 9/11, but then what happened afterwards, how we rallied around each other, that human spirit that exists, that power that brings us together, makes us love each other, makes us want to die for each other, that makes us want to comfort each other, makes us want to uplift each other in such a tragedy, that all exists in us right now. And so I'm almost in a way, you know, you could describe what happened on that day, but say, you know, tell your children it exists in you right now.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, there's someone here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can touch on, as a filmmaker, like what inspired you, or if you feel called to touch on this subject. Was it the videos that you watched and they inspired you, or were you looking for that?
Yeah, well, there is the way I found them, and I had tragedy in my own life in the same year as 9/11, and just a few short months before the attacks, I lost my mum, and it was very sudden and very unexpected, and obviously it had a huge effect on me. I was 21 years old, but it was this idea, you know, life changing in an instant, and for me and my family and my sister and my brother, it really did. And then I was with my sister in her apartment in North London as 9/11 happened, and we saw the same thing happen to thousands of people, Mary and others, and that feeling stayed with me, and it never left me for 20 years. And as a filmmaker, I was like, okay, how do I make a film that captures that sort of is true to my feeling and the things that I felt and the things I'm sure Mary and many others felt. So it wasn't a total accident that I found Ruth Sergel's footage, because I was always searching for a way to tell the story that was kind of true to my experience of it. And when I found her archive and her testimony, it really was. It totally rang true.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, there's someone back here, then we'll come down. Go ahead. Thank you. For those who weren't able to fully hear, it was a comment about being a professor in Texas on the day of 9/11 and being the first person to have to speak to his class about those events. And then also just that phenomenon which always happens where these big events can bring people together in a crisis, but eventually that moment fades and people begin to drift apart again. I don't know if there's anything anyone here wants to add as a comment.
Well, I'll just comment on that because I think what the professor is saying is we never really had a national conversation after 9/11 about 9/11. Why did it happen? Who were the people behind it? Yes, they were terrorists. And in the same way, we're making the same mistake because we are now looking at white supremacy as a group. We're not really trying to understand it. And if you compare it to what happened with the extremists over there, you can see that there are a lot of similarities. And extremism is growing everywhere in the world by leaps and bounds because they are getting inspired by one another. So we have to learn from these past errors that we've made. We are one of the greatest innovators on the face of this earth. We have all the tools, the think tanks, but yet we have never really done an exploratory of why did it happen. I know it's painful, I know it's hard, but it's the work that never really happened, and we just pushed the rug, we went to war, and then everything got silenced. And it's one of the reasons why we have never really reached out to the world. And that's why I mentioned how many Muslims have died in the aftermath of all the wars. And imagine all of those people and what they're going through right now as they are becoming refugees in their own lands and have to be relocated. So one more thing about the 9/11 museum. I think the 9/11 museum could have done this, but there was a error made in the curating of the museum. I was there in the early stages, and it all became about the event itself, not about its impact. So some of its educational programming, it still can be done, should include an ongoing education on the impact, the larger impact of 9/11. Yes, the personal lives are important, the mementos are important, the oral histories are important, but the ongoing impact of that. We are still the greatest nation on the face of this earth militarily, but you could see we just got defeated by guys with Kalashnikovs and flip-flops. So, so we have to, I think that we can learn a lot from this, and those of us who are coming together can spearhead some of that conversation. Thank you.
And I think just on a basis, a basic level, just for each of us to be somewhat, it takes work to be aware of your own human dynamic. We all have a human dynamic to us. And please don't, I suffer from it as much as anybody else. I try not to lie to myself that I don't have biases. I don't have things that create an anger and it just wants to be elevated, and I want to be vindicated for my anger, and we all are getting to a point where we want to be right. But it's a human thing. It's not because that person is wrong or that person is bad. It's because I am starting to get into a place where I can't control my environment, I can't control my society, so it's easier for me to be angry. And so, what I learned over time is the 9/11 events, it was an immediate and very similar experience that we all had that really just rallied us together. And what made that happen was the human spirit. That's something that came together that was in us all. And at the same time, now that we suffer through these challenges, what we're going through, especially with COVID, but then with a division and whatnot in the United States, especially, it's a challenge to our human spirit. It's a challenge to our control over our environment, and we don't have a common enemy now. And now but we're in search of an enemy, and it turns out that we turn on each other. But it's not because any one of us are bad. We just I think there's a real challenge for each of us to understand our own, human, failings perhaps, or our just desire to, be angry.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question. Was there a question here?
How did you explain it to your grandchildren or anything? Did you take them to the site and show them what you're going through, or
Question is, how did you explain 9/11 to younger people in your life?
And it goes back to the question from the gentleman asking, how do you talk to children about this? Which goes full circle to what Daisy was saying. My children were young and watched the towers on fire. And I said to Daisy earlier, we were lucky enough to live in a neighborhood that was heavily Muslim at the time. And so they were going to school with friends and fast runners and good spellers that were Muslim. And so it was intentionally not letting any kind of hatred seep in to your home or to your community. And we all need to do that. There is a long history. This isn't an isolated incident. As people, if we keep killing each other's brothers, there will just be somebody else crying on the other side. And so how do we all intentionally make sure that we're not doing that? And that's hard because we're not necessarily wired that way, and there's a long history. So we could all kill each other's brothers because we've all got a bone to pick. So really, how do we do this and how do we move forward in a place that begins to bring us all together? And luckily, I think that my children have grown up that way. I don't have grandkids yet, thank goodness.
We are just about out of time. Bjørn, was there anything you wanted to add as a final word?
I just wanted to thank the people on the stage with me, and we have to remember it's the 20th anniversary for 9/11, but for Mary, she lost her brother 20 years ago today, and I just want to say thank you for choosing to come and spend that with us. It means a lot, and your testimony, all of your testimonies in the film is incredibly powerful and really added to the conversation, so just thank you.
Actually, if I could thank Bjørn also as well, and David, I guess he's not here, but it was a powerful experience that we had. I think all of us as individuals coming to do this and then to go back into the box again, it brought up feelings that were just extraordinarily powerful that perhaps I thought I was going to forget, that I wanted to forget, but that came back in a real way. And that new box was exactly like the old one, and the feelings were there, and the space was the same, and the power came there, and that that's why each one of us were becoming emotional inside the box. And I wanted to stop at every point along the way and not do this anymore, but I persevered and continued. For one, it's necessary that we never forget, but then also the way that they had conducted this with such dignity and respect, and a true sense of not creating an agenda, but just letting voices and experiences be heard. And so that meant a lot, and we thank you so much.
Thank you.
And may I pay tribute to one person that lost somebody? So I met a woman named Marianne Salomon right after 9/11, and she had lost her husband in the towers. And she and I connected, and shortly after that, we exchanged emails with one another, and she decided that, as an educated woman, that she was not going to let her children become, subjects of hate. So she made every effort to stay in touch with me. And on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, I invited her because I created these beautiful plaques for members of families who had lost. And it was in Arabic. It was a Quranic verse from the Arabic, God, make me patient and heal me. And so she didn't know it, but on the back was the translation. So she took it home, she hung it up. Her son looked at it and said, "Mom, what does it say?" She said, "Well, son, let's look at the back." So she explained it to him. When her son Aiden went to Stanford, he came back for the first summer, and he said, "Mom, I can read that." She said, "How?" He said, "I took an Arabic class." And then he wrote on his T-shirt in Arabic, "I'm from Stanford," and he used to walk down at Stanford, and everybody would call him a terrorist and all this other stuff. He said, "Oh, stupid, all it says is I'm from Stanford." Long story short, 2 years ago, Aiden called me and said, "I want to intern with you. I want to work for you." And he came over and worked for me for the entire summer. Aiden is now in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and he just contacted me. And I want to remember that family, because this is a family that has actually pitched a sign in front of their home in New Jersey saying, "Hate will not live here." And this is a family that I admire, because I know Aiden's going to go great places in his life. He might run for Congress, he might become a president one day, and he might become an international lawyer. But this is the work that we need to do. It's long term, but it's beautiful because it's very hopeful and something great to look forward to. So I want to thank them and I want to acknowledge them today.
Thank you. That is a beautiful story. Please join me in thanking once again the team from Memory Box, Echoes of 9/11, Daisy Kahn, Director Bjørn Johnson, Mary Adams, and Captain A.J. Devine. Thank you all so much.